The baby in the storm. The rain fell heavily over the quiet town of Willowbrook, drenching everything in sight. Pastor Samuel Winton hurried along the dimly lit street, his worn coat barely keeping the chill out. The storm had come out of nowhere, unexpected and unrelenting, and he was eager to return to the warmth of the church. The sudden crack of thunder startled him, but it was the faint sound beneath it that made him stop. A soft, desperate cry echoed in the storm, barely audible but unmistakable. A baby's cry. Heart-pounding, Pastor Samuel turned, scanning the empty streets. The cries grew louder, pulling him toward an alleyway he'd never noticed. There, sheltered between two dumpsters, was a small bundle. Samuel approached cautiously, feeling the mix of dread and urgency knot his stomach. As he drew closer, he saw a tiny face, eyes squeezed shut, the baby's delicate frame wrapped in a thin, soaked blanket. "Dear Lord," Samuel whispered, reaching down to pick up the trembling infant. The baby's tiny hands opened, gripping his finger with surprising strength. He shivered at the thought of someone leaving a child here, abandoned to the elements. Taking a breath, he pressed the baby close to his chest, using his coat to shield the little one from the rain. As he walked back to the church, thoughts tumbled through his mind. Who would do this? What could have driven someone to leave such a young child alone in the cold? And as he reached the church steps, he made a silent vow to protect this child, no matter what. Back inside, he set up a makeshift crib with a soft blanket in his office. He tried feeding the baby from a bottle he quickly warmed, but the child continued to cry, unsettled. Eventually, Samuel took him in his arms, rocking gently until the little one quieted, drifting into a restless sleep. As the baby slept, Pastor Samuel found himself unable to rest. Something about the baby's arrival felt significant. He could sense it in his bones, a strange feeling he couldn't quite explain. Though he had no idea what lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain: this child was meant to be in his life. With a heart full of resolve, he decided to find a way to adopt him, even if it meant navigating the challenges and questions that might follow. But as dawn broke and light streamed into the church, a sense of unease settled over him. Samuel had made a choice, but he knew it would not be an easy path. As the years would reveal, the true identity of this child would challenge everything he knew about faith, love, and destiny. This opening introduces an atmosphere of mystery and a glimpse of the pastor's character and motivations, setting up for the journey and challenges they'll face together. Let me know if you'd like to proceed with more or have any specific elements you'd like included as the story unfolds. Growing up with faith and mystery. The boy, whom Pastor Samuel eventually named Elijah, grew up surrounded by the warmth of Willowbrook's close-knit church community. As the years went by, Samuel grew deeply attached to Elijah, and though the boy was quiet and reserved, his presence seemed to bring a sense of peace to everyone he met. Elijah's dark, thoughtful eyes and a profound, almost mysterious calmness set him apart from the other children. He spoke little, preferring instead to observe, his gaze seeming far older than his years. The congregation embraced Elijah as if he were one of their own. Miss Agnes, the elderly choir director, taught him to sing, noting that his voice carried a resonance beyond his age. Mr. Whittaker, a retired history teacher, would sit with Elijah on Sunday afternoons, sharing stories of long-forgotten places. But as much as they loved Elijah, people couldn't help but notice the air of mystery that lingered around him. It wasn't uncommon for the boy to slip away unnoticed, only to be found in quiet corners, his gaze fixed intently on the night sky. One evening, as Elijah approached his 10th birthday, he stood with Samuel in the churchyard after sunset, watching the stars. Samuel had planned a surprise for him, a modest celebration with the church members, a cake, and a few small gifts. He wanted Elijah to feel special, cherished. Yet, as they gazed upward, Elijah's eyes took on that distant look, as if he were searching for something far beyond the heavens. "Do you ever wonder what's out there, Pastor?" Elijah asked, his voice carrying a wisdom that made Samuel's heart ache. Samuel chuckled, tussling the boy's hair. "More than you'd think, my boy. But whatever's out there, I know one thing for sure. God is watching over us." Elijah looked down, nodding thoughtfully. "Maybe he is," he said quietly, "but sometimes I feel like I'm from somewhere else." The words lingered in Samuel's mind, unsettling him. He'd heard the boy speak like this before, hinting at an inexplicable awareness that Samuel couldn't quite place. He brushed it off as a child's imagination, a mind filled with questions too large to be answered. However, that night, as Samuel prepared for the birthday celebration, he noticed a strange envelope on his desk. It was sealed with no return address, its worn edges suggesting it had traveled far. His heart skipped a beat as he opened it, pulling out a single piece of paper with a cryptic message. "The child has a destiny beyond this world. Watch over him, for he will change lives." The note made Samuel's blood run cold. How could anyone know of Elijah's unique presence in his life? Who could have sent this letter, and why? As he slipped it into his pocket, he resolved to keep it a secret. Tonight was about celebrating Elijah, nothing else. When the guests arrived, the little church hall buzzed with excitement. Elijah was shy, but as he stood by Samuel's side, his smile lit up the room. They sang, shared stories, and celebrated Elijah's 10th year with all the warmth Samuel could muster. But even as they laughed and enjoyed each other's company, Samuel couldn't shake the sense of foreboding that lingered in the air. After the last guest had gone, Elijah and Samuel walked back to the quiet sanctuary of the church. Elijah carried a small toy, a carved wooden angel given to him by Miss Agnes, who'd insisted it would watch over him. The boy turned it over in his hands thoughtfully. "Pastor," he said, "do you think people have purposes, like we're here for a reason?" Samuel knelt to look into Elijah's eyes. "I believe that, Elijah. Every person has a calling, something that they're meant to do in this life." Elijah nodded slowly, gripping the angel tightly. "I think I want to help people, just like you." Samuel felt a rush of pride and fear all at once. He placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder, a silent promise that he would do everything in his power to protect this child from whatever unknown forces seemed to have an interest in him. As he watched Elijah fall asleep that night, Pastor Samuel prayed for guidance. He could feel the weight of responsibility growing heavier, and he knew that the journey he'd taken in that alleyway 10 years ago was far from over. Elijah wasn't just any boy. He was something extraordinary, with a path Samuel couldn't yet foresee. And as he gazed at the stars outside, a quiet voice in his heart reminded him that he would soon have to face the truth. Signs and wonders. In the months that followed Elijah's 10th birthday, Pastor Samuel noticed a series of strange events that made him question everything he thought he understood about the boy he raised. At first, it was easy to dismiss them as coincidences, but as these occurrences grew more frequent and vivid, Samuel knew there was something extraordinary at play. It began one Sunday after service. The congregation gathered in the small garden outside the church, sharing coffee and conversation under the late morning sun. Elijah was sitting alone by the rose bushes, his gaze distant. Samuel had grown used to these moments, times when Elijah would sit quietly, as though listening to something only he could hear. Suddenly, a hush fell over the crowd. The rose bush closest to Elijah, which had been wilted and near death for weeks, seemed to straighten, its withered branches brightening as new leaves unfurled before their eyes. The congregation watched, stunned, as a single bud blossomed, petals blooming to reveal a deep red rose that glowed with vibrant life. Mrs. Jacobs, one of the older members of the congregation, gasped, clutching her heart. "It's a miracle," she whispered. And before anyone could say otherwise, word of Elijah's gift spread like wildfire. From that day, people began approaching the church not only for spiritual guidance, but in search of healing and blessings, hoping to witness a miracle from the boy himself. Samuel found himself both awed and uneasy. Elijah, however, seemed almost oblivious to the attention, shrugging off the events as if he couldn't quite understand why they were happening. One evening, as Samuel was locking up the church, he found Elijah standing alone in the sanctuary, staring at the large wooden cross that hung at the front of the room. A soft light seemed to surround him, giving his young face an ethereal glow. "Are you all right, Elijah?" Samuel asked, his voice breaking the silence. Elijah turned to him, his expression pensive. "I don't know, Pastor. Sometimes I feel different, like there's something inside me that wants to come out, but I don't know what it is." He paused, his voice trembling slightly. "And sometimes I feel things before they happen. Like when I knew Mrs. Jacobs' rose would bloom again." Samuel's heart skipped a beat. He'd never heard Elijah speak so openly about his feelings. The boy's quiet, observant nature had often kept him from expressing his emotions. But now, as Samuel looked into his eyes, he saw both fear and curiosity. "What do you mean, Elijah?" he asked gently. Elijah looked away, his gaze fixed on a distant point, as though seeing something Samuel couldn't. "I don't know how to explain it, Pastor. It's like I can feel things around me, things people are going through. When Mrs. Jacobs was praying over her rose bush, I felt her sadness and her hope. And I felt something inside me change, like a spark." Samuel placed a comforting hand on Elijah's shoulder. "You're a special boy, Elijah. Maybe there's something in you, something that can help people. But whatever it is, we'll face it together." But as he spoke, Samuel's mind raced. He recalled the cryptic letter he'd received months ago, the warning that Elijah was destined for something beyond their world. Could these events be a part of that destiny? And if so, what did it mean for the life Samuel had carefully built around the boy? That night, Samuel prayed for guidance. As he sat alone in the quiet church, his thoughts were interrupted by a gentle knock on the door. Startled, he opened it to find a man dressed in a well-tailored suit, his face partially hidden under a wide-brimmed hat. The man introduced himself as Dr. Marcus Edison, a researcher from a distant city. "I've heard of the boy," Dr. Edison said, his voice calm but intense. "I study phenomena beyond the ordinary, you could say. I think Elijah might be part of something very unique." Samuel felt a surge of protectiveness. "Elijah's just a child. Whatever interest you have in him, he's under my care, and I intend to keep it that way." The man smiled, unfazed. "I mean no harm, Pastor, but the boy might possess abilities. He could be someone the world has been waiting for, a bridge, perhaps, between realms. I believe he can access powers we don't yet understand. Have you not noticed the strange events around him?" Samuel clenched his jaw, unwilling to show the stranger his own uncertainty. "I have, but that doesn't give you the right to interfere." Dr. Edison nodded. "I understand, but if you ever need answers, or if Elijah begins to experience more, here's my card." He pressed a small business card into Samuel's hand before turning to leave. "I'll be nearby if you need me. And Pastor, sometimes we don't choose our purpose, it chooses us." As Dr. Edison disappeared into the night, Samuel felt the weight of responsibility settle even heavier on his shoulders. The world was beginning to notice Elijah's gifts, and though he'd raised the boy with love and care, Samuel realized he might not be able to protect him from the destiny that was unfolding. Later that night, Samuel found Elijah asleep, a peaceful look on his face. As he watched him, Samuel couldn't help but wonder what other gifts or challenges lay hidden within the child. He prayed for strength, knowing that whatever awaited them, he would stand by Elijah's side. But deep down, he sensed that the boy was meant for a purpose far beyond anything he'd imagined, a purpose that would eventually reveal Elijah's true identity and the role he was meant to play in the world. This part builds the intrigue around Elijah's powers, introduces a mysterious figure aware of his potential, and deepens Samuel's internal struggle to protect Elijah. Let me know if you're ready to proceed with Part 4 or have any specific details you'd like added. The Awakening. The small town of Willowbrook had always been a quiet place, but lately its residents sensed a shift, a stirring of the unusual. They spoke in hushed tones about the miracle child at the church, the boy who could heal wilting flowers, ease old pains, and some claimed, even calm storms. For Pastor Samuel, the strange occurrences surrounding Elijah were becoming impossible to ignore, each new incident more baffling than the last. One particularly cloudy afternoon, a fierce storm swept through Willowbrook, darkening the skies and flooding the streets. As the winds howled and the thunder cracked, Samuel worried about Elijah, who had gone out to the edge of town for his usual walk. He paced the church, his heart pounding with dread until, finally, the doors creaked open and Elijah stepped inside, drenched but calm, with an odd, serene look on his face. "Elijah, I was worried sick," Samuel exclaimed, rushing to him with a towel. "This storm is dangerous. What were you thinking?" Elijah simply shook his head, looking at Samuel with those deep, knowing eyes. "I wasn't afraid, Pastor. I felt safe, like the storm was listening to me." The words left Samuel speechless, but Elijah continued, as if unburdening a long-kept secret. "I don't know how to explain it, but sometimes I feel like I can talk to things. The wind, the rain, it's like they're alive and understand me." Samuel struggled to find words, a mixture of awe and unease tightening in his chest. "Elijah, this is something extraordinary. Have you felt this way before?" Elijah nodded. "Ever since I was little, but it's getting stronger. Like the world is reaching out to me." The gravity of Elijah's words lingered in the quiet sanctuary, filling Samuel with both wonder and fear. How could a boy have such power? And what did it mean for the future? Just as he was about to speak, there was a knock at the church door. Samuel's heart sank. He had a feeling about who it might be. Opening the door, he found Dr. Marcus Edison standing in the rain, his eyes keen and purposeful. "Pastor," Dr. Edison greeted him calmly, stepping inside. "I sensed it. A surge. Something incredible happened here, didn't it?" Samuel hesitated, glancing at Elijah, who stood behind him with curiosity and concern. "This isn't a good time, Dr. Edison. Elijah's had a strange experience, but that's all." Dr. Edison's gaze flicked to Elijah, his eyes intense. "This isn't a mere experience, Pastor. Elijah is awakening to his true nature. You know as well as I do that he's no ordinary child. He's special, chosen, even." Samuel's protective instincts flared. "Whatever Elijah is or isn't, he's a child in my care, and I won't let you interfere with his life." Elijah looked between them, sensing the tension. "Pastor, who is this man?" Dr. Edison stepped forward, his voice gentle yet resolute. "Elijah, I am someone who studies the mysteries of the world, people like you who have been given gifts beyond understanding. There's much I could help you with. Answers about why you feel the way you do, why the world seems to respond to you." Elijah hesitated, looking up at Samuel. He felt a pull toward Dr. Edison's words, a need to understand what he'd been feeling. Yet, his trust in Samuel was unbreakable. Seeing the conflict in the boy's eyes, Samuel spoke softly. "Elijah, remember that you're here for a reason, and you have your whole life ahead of you to understand it. I don't think we need answers from outside right now. Your journey is something you'll discover in your own time." Dr. Edison sighed, seemingly accepting Samuel's stance. But before he left, he turned to Elijah one last time. "Elijah, if ever you wish to know more, there's a place where children like you gather. A sanctuary where you'd be safe and free to explore your gifts. Remember, you have a choice." He handed Elijah a small, ornate card bearing an address, and then exited into the rain, his figure disappearing into the mist. Later that evening, Elijah lay awake, staring at the card Dr. Edison had given him. The words, "a sanctuary for children like you," echoed in his mind, igniting a mixture of fear and curiosity. But as he looked around his small room in the church, he felt a sense of belonging here with Samuel, the only father he'd ever known. The next day, as Samuel and Elijah went about their routine, another strange event occurred. They were visiting Mrs. Jacobs, who had been unwell for weeks. Samuel had brought soup and prayer, but Elijah, noticing her pain, took her hand gently. He closed his eyes, and a warmth seemed to flow from him, visible even to Samuel, who watched with amazement as Mrs. Jacobs' face softened, her aches and pains easing as if lifted by an invisible force. "Elijah," Samuel said afterward, his voice trembling, "do you feel anything unusual when you do that?" Elijah looked down, appearing unsure. "It feels like light, like something warm flowing out of me. I don't know what it is, but it feels good, like I'm helping." Samuel nodded, swallowing back the emotions welling up in him. The truth was undeniable now. Elijah's gifts weren't just miracles. They were signs of something larger than either of them could understand. And as Samuel held the boy's hand, he knew that his role was not only to protect him, but to guide him in discovering what he was meant to be. The revelation. Elijah had grown accustomed to the looks of wonder and curiosity he received from the people in Willowbrook, but as he approached his 12th year, something inside him felt incomplete. The mysterious occurrences, the strange warmth he felt whenever he healed someone, or sensed the elements around him, were becoming more intense. Even Pastor Samuel, who had once assured him that everything would be all right, now looked at him with a mixture of awe and concern that seemed to say more than words ever could. One autumn night, after the last churchgoer had left and the sanctuary was silent, Elijah found Samuel sitting alone, lost in thought. The pastor had aged in recent years, his once bright hair now streaked with gray. There was a tension in his shoulders, a weight he carried that only grew heavier with each miraculous incident surrounding Elijah. Determined to break through this silence, Elijah sat beside him. "Pastor," Elijah said quietly, "do you know why I'm like this? Why these things happen around me?" Samuel hesitated, his gaze falling to his clasped hands. "Elijah, I've prayed over this question every night since the day I found you. I thought that by raising you with faith and love, you'd find peace in who you are. But maybe it's time we faced the truth." Elijah's heart raced. He'd longed to hear these words, but now, as he looked into the eyes of the only father he'd ever known, he felt an unexplainable fear. "What truth, Pastor?" Taking a steadying breath, Samuel rose and crossed the room to a small locked chest he kept hidden in a corner. He unlocked it, withdrawing a single piece of paper, the letter he'd received years ago, the one that spoke of Elijah's destiny. Samuel handed it to him, his hands trembling. Elijah read it carefully, his eyes widening as he took in each word. "The child has a destiny beyond this world. Watch over him, for he will change lives." The weight of the letter settled in Elijah's mind, sparking a flood of emotions, confusion, wonder, and a small glimmer of something he'd felt all along. "So, I'm not just like other kids," he whispered. Samuel placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder. "No, Elijah. I think you're someone truly special, and I don't just mean your gifts. You were sent here for a reason, a purpose we're only beginning to understand." Before Elijah could respond, a gentle knock echoed through the sanctuary. They both turned, and Samuel's heart sank as he recognized the silhouette of Dr. Edison framed in the doorway. His presence, which had always seemed like a distant possibility, now loomed before them with an undeniable authority. "Good evening, Pastor Elijah," Dr. Edison greeted, stepping into the dim candlelight. "I apologize for intruding, but I had to come." "Elijah, it's time you understood the truth." Samuel stiffened, positioning himself protectively between Elijah and the man he considered a stranger. "What truth are you talking about?" Dr. Edison's expression softened, as though he too felt the gravity of the moment. "Elijah, the world you know, the world we all know, is only part of a much larger reality. You're one of the very few who can bridge that reality with our own. You have powers that most people can only dream of, gifts that connect you to forces beyond this earth. Elijah's head spun as he tried to comprehend Dr. Edison's words. But how? I've lived here all my life. I don't remember anything else. Dr. Edison knelt down to meet Elijah's eyes. You may not remember, but deep within you, there is knowledge. Have you ever felt like you were waiting for something, like there's more to who you are? Elijah nodded, his eyes wide with fear and hope. Yes, I feel it all the time. Dr. Edison looked at Samuel, his gaze filled with a quiet respect. Pastor, you've done more for this child than most people could ever understand. You've protected him from what he was not ready to face. But now he needs to know the rest of his story. Reluctantly, Samuel nodded, allowing Dr. Edison to continue. Elijah, you're not entirely from this world. Your true family comes from a distant realm, a place where people possess abilities beyond anything here. Your parents entrusted you to this world to protect you, to give you a chance to grow safely, away from the dangers of their world. A shiver ran through Elijah, his whole being vibrating with the weight of this revelation. He tried to process the idea that he was not just different, but came from an entirely different world. So, am I supposed to go back there? Dr. Edison shook his head. Not unless you choose to. The life you have here, the people you love, they're as much a part of you as the world you come from. But your gifts, Elijah, they're surfacing now because they're a part of your destiny, part of why you were sent here. You have the potential to bring peace to both worlds, to connect them. Samuel put an arm around Elijah, sensing the boy's turmoil. You don't have to do anything you're not ready for, Elijah. This is your life, your choice. Elijah nodded, feeling overwhelmed but grateful for Samuel's support. His mind buzzed with questions he didn't yet know how to ask, but one thing was clear. He could no longer ignore who he was or the powers he held within. As he looked into Dr. Edison's eyes, he felt the stirrings of a purpose he didn't yet understand, but knew he could no longer run from. I don't know what this means for me, Elijah admitted, his voice trembling. But if I can help, if I'm meant to do something important, I want to try. Dr. Edison smiled softly, pride evident in his gaze. Then I'll be here to guide you, Elijah, to help you understand your gifts and how to use them. But know that you're never alone. The people who love you, Pastor Samuel, and the family that sent you here, they'll all be with you every step of the way. As the candlelight flickered, casting shadows across the sanctuary walls, Elijah felt a sense of peace settle over him. He still didn't understand the full extent of his powers or his purpose, but he knew one thing. He had been given these gifts for a reason he was now ready to embrace. And in the quiet that followed, Pastor Samuel took his hand, holding tightly to the boy he had raised, and made a silent vow. No matter what the future held, he would stand by Elijah, protecting him as he stepped into the unknown. Embracing the unknown. In the weeks following Dr. Edison's revelation, Elijah's life changed in ways he could have never imagined. The truth of his origins echoed in his mind, a constant reminder of a world he'd never seen but felt intimately connected to. Each day, he found himself more attuned to his powers. He could sense emotions, understand the silent language of nature, and in moments of stillness, he could even feel a gentle hum in his spirit, as if the other world were calling to him. But alongside his growing powers came a sense of responsibility that weighed heavily on his young shoulders. The townsfolk of Willowbrook began to notice that Elijah was different, but they didn't see the mystery of his origins. Instead, they saw a boy gifted with the grace of healing and kindness. Strangers arrived from neighboring towns, whispering of a miracle child who could calm their burdens, and Samuel's once quiet church became a sanctuary for people seeking comfort and answers. One chilly autumn morning, Elijah sat on the church steps, watching the orange and red leaves fall, dancing on the crisp breeze. Dr. Edison had arranged to meet him there to begin Elijah's training. As he waited, he thought about his journey, about the little boy who had once felt lost in the world, and the boy he was now. someone standing on the edge of a great unknown. When Dr. Edison arrived, he greeted Elijah with a warm smile. "Are you ready, Elijah? Today, I'll show you how to connect with your world, how to channel your gifts." Elijah nodded, nervous but determined. Dr. Edison led him to the quiet forest behind the church, where the trees were tall and the air was filled with the scent of pine. They stopped at a clearing, and Dr. Edison began the lesson, explaining how Elijah could control the energy within him, channeling it through his thoughts and intentions. "Your powers come from a deep place, Elijah, from the energy that binds both worlds," Dr. Edison explained. "By connecting to it, you can understand and feel things far beyond ordinary perception." Elijah closed his eyes, taking a deep breath as he tried to center himself. He could feel the hum within him grow stronger, and as he focused, he sensed the world around him in a way he never had before. The rustling of leaves, the gentle heartbeat of the earth, and the quiet songs of creatures moving unseen in the forest. With Dr. Edison's guidance, he began to channel this energy outward, feeling it flow from his heart and into his hands. He held them out, and to his amazement, the autumn leaves lifted from the ground, swirling gently in the air before settling back down. A sense of awe washed over him, and he realized that he had only begun to understand the depth of his abilities. Over the next several weeks, Dr. Edison helped Elijah explore the range of his powers. They practiced in secret, away from the prying eyes of the townsfolk, who saw only a humble, gentle boy with a gift for kindness. But Pastor Samuel was never far, always watching from a distance, offering silent encouragement as Elijah grew into the young man he was meant to be. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Elijah sat with Pastor Samuel in the sanctuary. He looked at the man who had saved him, who had raised him with unyielding love and guided him through every step of his journey. "Pastor," Elijah began, his voice trembling, "I feel like I'm ready to help more people, but I don't want to leave you or this town. It's my home." Samuel smiled, his eyes filled with pride and understanding. "Elijah, your gifts were given to you for a reason, a purpose greater than any one place. But no matter where you go or how far you travel, you'll always have a home here with me. This church, this town, they will always be part of who you are." Elijah's heart filled with warmth, and he realized that Samuel was right. He didn't have to abandon the life he'd built here, but he could use his gifts to connect both worlds, just as he was meant to. And though he felt a pang of sadness at the thought of leaving, he knew that his path was one of both duty and destiny. Not long after, news of Elijah's healing spread beyond Willowbrook, and he received an invitation to a distant town where people were suffering from an illness that had plagued them for months. Pastor Samuel, though reluctant to see him go, encouraged Elijah to follow this call, knowing that it was the first step in fulfilling his purpose. As he prepared to leave, the townsfolk gathered at the church to see him off. Mrs. Jacobs hugged him tightly, giving him her old, worn Bible for protection. Children gathered around, looking up at him with wide eyes, as if he were a hero in a storybook, and Samuel placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, giving him one last blessing. "Go forth, Elijah, and may you bring light wherever you walk," Samuel said, his voice full of pride and a hint of sorrow. As Elijah walked down the dusty path out of Willowbrook, he turned to look back, seeing Samuel standing at the church steps, watching him with a mixture of joy and heartbreak. Elijah waved, feeling a rush of gratitude for the man who had raised him, who had given him the strength to face the unknown. And as he continued down the road, the weight of his calling felt lighter, buoyed by the love and faith that Samuel and the people of Willowbrook had placed in him. Elijah's heart brimmed with hope, for he knew that this was only the beginning of his journey. With every step, he felt the power within him grow stronger, the purpose he had been searching for now clear and true. He was not just a boy from Willowbrook, he was a bridge, a beacon of hope between two worlds. And as he embraced his destiny, he knew he would carry the spirit of Willowbrook with him, forever guiding him home. The test of faith. As Elijah left Willowbrook behind, a surge of excitement and apprehension filled him. The world beyond the small town felt vast, unknown, and full of possibility. But each step also reminded him of his promise, to use his gifts for good, to bridge worlds, to bring peace. After days of travel, he arrived in a bustling town nestled in a valley surrounded by mountains. The illness that had plagued the town was severe. It had left the community drained, and many had lost hope. Word of Elijah's arrival spread quickly, and people gathered, some in disbelief, others curious, hoping that the rumors of a young healer might hold a glimmer of truth. The local doctor, a gruff but well-meaning man named Dr. Archer, was skeptical. He had heard of faith healers and miracle workers before, none of whom had brought any lasting relief. Yet something about Elijah's presence softened him. There was an earnestness in the boy's gaze, a kindness that felt genuine and untainted. "You really think you can help these people, son?" Dr. Archer asked, crossing his arms as he studied Elijah. "I don't know exactly what I can do," Elijah admitted, meeting the doctor's gaze with unwavering determination. "But I have to try." Dr. Archer sighed, guiding Elijah to the town's small clinic. As they entered, Elijah felt the weight of suffering around him. The patients were exhausted, some lying listlessly on cots, others coughing softly, their eyes clouded with despair. He closed his eyes, reaching inward to the place where he felt his connection to the unseen energy that had always been a part of him. He took a deep breath, and as he opened his eyes, a warmth began to spread through the room. Elijah approached each patient, laying a gentle hand on their forehead. He felt the warmth flow from his hands, a soothing light enveloping each person he touched. Slowly, color returned to their cheeks, their eyes brightening as if awaking from a deep slumber. Dr. Archer watched, unable to hide his astonishment. He'd never seen anything like it, something beyond the realm of medicine, something that transcended reason. After hours of healing, Elijah sank into a chair, exhausted but filled with a profound sense of fulfillment. One by one, the patients stood, their strength returning. Their gratitude was palpable, their eyes filled with tears and whispered prayers of thanks. Elijah's heart swelled with humility and joy, realizing that his gifts could indeed make a difference. But as news of his healing spread, so did doubt and suspicion. Not everyone welcomed him with open arms. Some townsfolk whispered that he was unnatural, that his powers were a trick, or worse, a curse. They feared what they didn't understand, and Elijah found himself caught between gratitude and mistrust. One evening, as he walked back from the clinic, a group of men confronted him in the town square. Their faces were stern, their voices filled with skepticism and unease. "You think you're some kind of saint, boy," one of them sneered. "People like you, you're dangerous, playing with forces you don't understand." Elijah felt a pang of fear but stood tall. "I don't want to harm anyone. I only want to help." The men exchanged dark glances, and another man, his voice harsh, said, "Help, or are you here to make yourself a god among us?" Before Elijah could respond, Dr. Archer appeared, his face set in a hard line as he stood between Elijah and the men. "This boy saved lives today. You can call it what you want, but don't let your fear turn to hate. There are enough battles in this world without us creating new ones out of ignorance." The men muttered but slowly dispersed, leaving Elijah and Dr. Archer standing alone in the square. Elijah looked at the doctor, his eyes filled with uncertainty. "Why do they hate me for helping?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Dr. Archer placed a reassuring hand on Elijah's shoulder. "People fear what they don't understand, Elijah. They don't see your heart. They only see the power you hold, and that scares them. It's a heavy burden, one I can't fully understand, but I believe you were meant to bear it." Over the next few days, Elijah continued to help where he could, but the town remained divided. Some revered him as a miracle, while others avoided him, their mistrust growing. He felt the weight of his calling deepen, realizing that helping people wasn't as simple as he'd once thought. His gifts, though powerful, came with responsibilities and risks he hadn't foreseen. One night, as he prayed alone, he felt a familiar presence. In his heart, he heard a voice, quiet but strong, a voice that sounded like Pastor Samuel, filled with wisdom and love. "Elijah, your journey will be difficult, but remember the love that guided you. You were chosen, not for ease, but for purpose. Walk forward with courage, and let your kindness be the light that guides you." The words filled Elijah with renewed strength. He knew that his journey wouldn't be without struggle, but he also understood that the people who feared him didn't define him. His purpose was clear: to help those in need, even if it meant facing doubt and mistrust along the way. With a calm resolve, he continued his work, healing and comforting those who sought his help. And as time passed, more towns came to know of the boy who could heal with a touch, whose presence brought peace and hope. Elijah became a wanderer, a healer whose name was spoken in whispers across villages and towns, a figure both humble and extraordinary. Through every trial, every grateful smile and suspicious glance, Elijah carried with him the love of Pastor Samuel, the teachings of Dr. Edison, and the spirit of Willowbrook. He walked a path that was both lonely and full, a bridge between worlds, guided by faith and the quiet strength he'd gained from those who loved him. And though he had many more miles to travel, Elijah knew one thing for certain. He was never alone, for he carried with him the hearts of all who had helped shape him, leading him ever forward toward his true purpose. The trials of compassion. Elijah's journey across towns and villages became a tapestry of stories, moments of hope, faces filled with gratitude, and, inevitably, glimpses of fear and distrust. As he ventured further from Willowbrook, he encountered people from every walk of life, each carrying burdens that weighed heavily on their hearts. And though he did not know them, he felt their pain as if it were his own, the gift of empathy binding him to their suffering. One evening, Elijah arrived in a large town called Greystone, a place known for its bustling marketplaces and thriving community. But as he walked through the streets, he sensed an underlying tension in the air. The people seemed hurried, guarded, and the few who noticed Elijah looked at him with suspicion, whispering as he passed. News of his abilities had reached Greystone ahead of him, but unlike in the other towns, the welcome here was colder, wary. After finding shelter at a small inn on the town's edge, Elijah learned more about Greystone's troubles. A mysterious illness had swept through the town, taking the lives of many and leaving others bedridden. Rumors circulated that it was a curse, the work of dark forces. The town's leaders had forbidden any mystics or healers, fearing that their practices would only bring more harm. Elijah's presence, though unnoticed by most, was already sparking quiet conversations among the people. Determined to help despite the warnings, Elijah made his way to a secluded area where the afflicted were kept, quarantined by town authorities. A young girl named Leela, who had seen him in the marketplace, offered to guide him, her small hand slipping confidently into his. "My mama is sick," she whispered, her wide eyes looking up at him with quiet desperation. "People say you can help, that you can make people better." Elijah squeezed her hand gently, nodding. "I'll do everything I can, Leela." As they approached the row of cottages housing the sick, Elijah was struck by the silence. The air was thick with grief and fear, the windows of the cottages darkened by heavy cloth to ward off what people feared was an evil curse. He could feel the pain emanating from within, the despair of the families who had lost loved ones or waited anxiously beside them. Elijah entered the first cottage, greeted by the mother's frail form lying on a simple bed, her breathing shallow and labored. He knelt beside her, taking her hand in his. Closing his eyes, he focused inward, summoning the warmth and light he knew so well. He felt it flow through him, filling the room with a soft glow. The mother's breathing steadied, color returning to her cheeks, and after a few moments, her eyes opened, a look of wonder and relief filling them. Tears streamed down Leila's face as she hugged her mother, and Elijah felt a surge of peace, But as he moved to the next cottage, whispers grew louder outside, the townspeople gathering, their faces a mix of awe and suspicion. One man, tall and imposing, stepped forward. "You think you can heal our town? We've had enough of outsiders with strange powers." His voice was thick with accusation, and murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Elijah faced them calmly. "I'm here only to help. I don't ask for anything in return. I just want to ease the suffering here." But the man sneered, crossing his arms. "They all say that. My brother died after a healer tried his tricks, and I won't let that happen again. You're nothing but a charlatan, playing with forces you don't understand." Embracing a new path. The weeks that followed were some of the most challenging and revealing of Mark's life. Each morning, as he stepped into the restaurant, he carried with him the commitment he had made to himself, to David, and most importantly, to Evelyn. He knew that change couldn't happen overnight, that the bitterness and resentment he had fostered for years wouldn't simply vanish. But for the first time, he believed that he could be more than just a gatekeeper enforcing rigid standards. He could be someone who made people feel seen, valued, and welcomed. His first task was reconnecting with his team. For years, he had kept them at arm's length, maintaining a strict professional distance that left little room for camaraderie. His colleagues had learned to approach him with caution, sensing his unpredictable moods and harsh expectations. But he could see now that this approach had done more harm than good, creating an atmosphere of fear rather than respect. Mark decided to start small, reaching out to Rosa, the young waitress who had reminded him of his earlier values. One morning, he found her in the kitchen, organizing silverware with her usual quiet efficiency. She looked up, surprised to see him lingering nearby, and he noticed the hint of wariness in her expression. He took a deep breath, knowing he would have to earn her trust back step by step. "Rosa," he began, his voice uncharacteristically soft, "I wanted to thank you for everything, for sticking around even when things were difficult." She looked at him, her surprise evident, and he could see her trying to gauge his sincerity. "Thank you, Mark," she replied cautiously, as though unsure of his motives. "I mean, I've always believed in this place, in what it could be." Mark nodded, feeling a pang of regret at the realization that Rosa had held on to a vision for the restaurant that he had long abandoned. "I know I haven't made it easy," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "But I want to change that. I want this place to be what it was meant to be, a place where people feel welcome. And I know I can't do that alone." Rosa's expression softened, and he felt a glimmer of hope. "I think that's a good start, Mark," she said, her voice filled with a gentle encouragement. "I think we can make it a place people look forward to coming to." They continued talking, and by the end of the conversation, Mark felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of community, of shared purpose, a feeling he hadn't realized he'd missed so deeply. Rosa's acceptance marked a small but significant step in his journey, a reminder that redemption was possible, if only he was willing to put in the effort. Over the following days, Mark made an effort to connect with the rest of his team, greeting each of them with a warmth they hadn't seen in years. He began to listen more, to consider their suggestions, and to show an appreciation for their hard work. Gradually, he noticed a change in their attitudes, a renewed energy that filled the restaurant with a subtle but unmistakable warmth. But it was with the patrons that Mark's transformation truly took shape. Each time a new customer entered, he reminded himself of Evelyn's words, choosing to see them not as obstacles to be managed, but as guests to be welcomed. He found himself greeting them with a smile, engaging in small conversations, asking about their day. And the impact was immediate. The regulars who had once regarded him with a mix of respect and fear now began to approach him with friendly familiarity, exchanging pleasantries and even sharing stories of their own lives. One evening, as he was clearing tables after a busy dinner service, Mark noticed a young man sitting alone in the corner, nursing a cup of coffee. The man looked tired, his shoulders slumped, and his gaze fixed on the table, as though lost in thought. In the past, Mark would have ignored him, focusing instead on his duties and leaving the man to his own devices. But something in the man's expression stirred a memory within him. A younger version of himself, filled with quiet frustration and loneliness. Taking a deep breath, Mark approached the man's table, careful not to intrude. "Long day?" he asked, his tone gentle. The man looked up, startled, before offering a small, weary smile. "Yeah," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just one of those days, I guess." Mark nodded, feeling an unexpected kinship with the young man. "I know what that's like," he said, pulling out a chair and sitting across from him. "Sometimes it feels like the whole world is against you, doesn't it?" The man looked at him, his surprise evident. "Yeah," he admitted, a hint of relief in his voice. "It's been rough lately. Work, family, it all just piles up." Mark listened, letting the man's words wash over him, feeling a sense of empathy he hadn't known he was capable of. As they talked, he realized that this moment, this simple act of kindness, was more powerful than any rule or standard he had enforced in the past. For the first time, he was using his position not as a means of control, but as a way to make a difference, however small. When the man finally left, he thanked Mark with a sincerity that left him humbled. It was a simple gesture, yet it reminded Mark of the potential he held, not just as a manager, but as a person capable of making others feel valued and understood. In the weeks that followed, the restaurant underwent a quiet transformation. Word began to spread about the warm, welcoming atmosphere, and soon, new faces joined the regulars, drawn by the sense of community that Mark and his team had fostered. The restaurant's reputation grew, not for its exclusivity or high standards, but for the kindness and respect that filled its walls. And with each new day, Mark felt himself healing, slowly but surely shedding the bitterness that had once defined him. But there was one final step he needed to take, a conversation he had been avoiding, but one he knew was essential to his journey of redemption. One evening, as the restaurant was closing, he sat down at his desk, pulling out a piece of paper and pen. He had thought long and hard about how to reach out to Claire, the woman he had once loved so deeply, whose departure had been the catalyst for the bitterness that had taken over his life. She had long since moved on, but he needed to tell her, to make peace with the pain he had carried for so many years. Taking a deep breath, he began to write, pouring out years of unresolved emotions onto the page. He told her about his anger, his feelings of betrayal, but he also acknowledged his own role in allowing that pain to consume him. He wrote of the restaurant, of Evelyn and David, of the transformation he had experienced. And finally, he thanked her, not for leaving, but for helping him realize the changes he needed to make within himself. When he finished, he felt a sense of release, as though a weight he had carried for years had finally lifted. He knew that Claire might never read the letter, but that didn't matter. The act of writing it, of confronting his own pain and letting it go, was enough. The following day, Evelyn returned to the restaurant, this time alone. She greeted him with a warm smile, her eyes filled with the same quiet understanding that had set his journey in motion. They sat together over tea, and as they talked, Mark found himself opening up, sharing his fears, his hopes, and the lessons he had learned along the way. Evelyn listened patiently, her presence a steady, comforting anchor. When he finished, she placed a gentle hand over his, her gaze filled with pride. "You've come a long way, Mark," she said softly. "Remember, the journey doesn't end here. Kindness isn't something we arrive at. It's something we practice every day. But I have no doubt that you'll continue to grow." As they sat in comfortable silence, Mark felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had spent years feeling trapped, believing that his life was defined by bitterness and loss. But now, he understood that the power to change had always been within him, waiting for him to choose a different path. With Evelyn's guidance, David's quiet encouragement, and the support of his team, Mark found himself becoming the person he had once dreamed of being. A man capable of kindness, empathy, and understanding. And as he looked around the restaurant, he saw not just a place of business, but a space filled with laughter, warmth, and the shared humanity he had so long overlooked. For the first time in years, Mark felt at peace, his heart open to the possibilities that lay ahead. And as he stepped into the dining area, greeting the familiar faces that had come to trust him, he knew that he had finally found his way back, not only to the values he had once cherished, but to himself.